Welcome to Christ the Lord Clearwater's weekly message. I'm Pastor John Backus here in our studio in Clearwater, Florida, where we share the good news of Jesus on the Gulf Coast. You're joining us as we continue a message series called Hard Truth. We're looking at some of the challenging teachings of Jesus. Today we're going to be exploring the tension between lost and found, reaching out toward those who are far from God or putting distance between ourselves and them. This is once again, another topic that can make my head feel a little bit dizzy just due to its complexity and nuance. Now, the way my own head usually works, if I wake up in the morning and do about 4 head rolls, that's all it takes to get me dizzy. And this fourth message in our series, Hard Truth, I'm about at that point where I'm starting to get dizzy. To make sense of competing ideas and values and knowing how they fit together. Today we're going to talk about the Christian's view of lost and found. What is my Christian response to wrong people? So if I'm over here and there's someone whose life is and heart is aligned against the things of God, do I approach them or stay away from them? Thankfully, this topic that makes me dizzy. I'm not the only one who might be dizzy from this topic. The Apostle Peter also saw different approaches from Jesus himself. You may remember that Peter once pushed against Jesus and said, "You're not going to have to suffer the way you describe." And Jesus turned around and said, "Get away from me, Satan. Get behind me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." He told Peter to get away. He put distance between Christ and Peter. But then later, after Christ's resurrection, Jesus spoke to Peter and said, "Hey, I want you to feed my sheep. I want you to have a pastoral, apostolic role. I want you to be a shepherd like I was a shepherd of people." So Jesus both pushed away against Peter and reached out to bring Peter to himself, different behaviors at different times. The Apostle Paul did the same. In our congregation here, we've read from a letter to the Corinthian church where there was a man guilty of sexual perversion. And the congregation had just said, "Well, we're Christians, so we just don't push him on it. We just accept everything." And Paul wrote to them strongly, he said, "Disown that pervert from your congregation." Yeah, he told them to hand that man over to Satan so that his soul may be saved. Tell that man, you don't identify as Christian by your lifestyle. You are identifying as a follower of Satan, so don't think you're included with our church group. Paul wanted them to push away. But then later in history in 2 Corinthians, he addresses what seems to be that same man, and he tells the congregation, don't push him away, bring him back, accept him, forgive him, affirm that you love him. You don't want to discourage him. 2 completely different approaches to a man whose life had gone wrong. And then lastly, third example is Mr. P. I'll use this in quotation marks because I don't know the exact names of these people, but the author of Psalm 1, we'll start with, wrote, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked or stand in the way that sinners take or sit in the company of mockers." We hear this psalm and we say, it's pretty wise to put distance between the godly and the ungodly. But then in the New Testament era, it seemed like some of the clergy of the day, the Pharisees, were trying to do this. They're the second Mr. P. Psalms is the first one, and now the Pharisees are the second one. They saw Jesus approaching and interacting with the tax collectors and sinners of the day, and they muttered about him, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." To which Jesus responded by telling a teaching story to correct their wrong thinking. So what is the Christian response to wrong people when they're living or acting in ways that from God's word aren't right? Christians can feel trapped, even if we're well-intentioned. We might say, well, if I act lovingly to them, it's as if I'm endorsing their behavior. On the other hand, if I warn or criticize, then am I being judgmental? We both don't want to enable wrong, but we also don't want to come across as hypocritical or judgmental. This can make our head spin. This stuff isn't easy. It's not easy to know the right response. Which is why perhaps Jesus, to help us find balance in this, told the story in Luke 15 of the lost sheep and the lost coin later. Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country where they're safe and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. It seems Jesus gave us this parable, this teaching story, to help us understand what was in his heart when he evaluated the question, what do I do about wrong people? Do I welcome them into my company, or do I leave distance between me and them? To get it to why Jesus told this parable, we might ask, what ingredients are in his heart? What mix of thought or reason and emotion are making him act the way he does? And in the same way, what about those Pharisees who were criticizing Jesus and were corrected by him? What ingredients are in the hearts of his critics? What are they cooking up in their logic and their emotion? Why did Jesus reach out in this case when the Pharisees pushed away? This is an important question because if we can get at the heart of it, then it will help us solve our own tension about what we do, what my Christian response is toward wrong people. What ingredients are in me? What are the motives and the rationale for why I act the way I do? Now, when we get into the heart of people, there's oftentimes complexity and mess there. And the Apostle Paul knows it. So when we talk about the ingredients of what goes on in our inner life and our thinking patterns, we're not going to be naive babies about this. We can't say, gaga goo goo, this is really simple. Rather, it takes nuanced, complex thinking. That's what Paul wanted Christians to do. He wanted them to have that as a result of biblical training, pastoral care, and the community of Christians to work on these ideas together. He said in Ephesians, God gave pastors and teachers, apostles and prophets to build up the church so that we would all grow in unity. That way we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Paul wanted his readers not to be like a baby that hadn't learned how to stand yet, that was easily toppled, or like somebody walking when wind blows against them and they feel off balance. The ideas and teachings that we put into practice can be complicated, and we need to grow and mature into them. His next words help us understand how we might do that. What are the two ingredients especially that can help us keep balanced, wise perspective in nuanced and complicated questions? Speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. The key to maturity in our connection with Jesus comes from, it is speaking the truth in love. These are the ingredients that we want in us anytime we're about to look at another person's life and decide how to act. We want to ask, am I following truth, an accurate read of the person and the circumstances and my motives? We also want to have love, a desire to benefit a person, to help them find their way to well-being and rightness. So let's go into our heart and ask what our ingredients are. In my case, it's of my congregation, of me as a pastor, and of my people. We'll start by asking, how do we feel when we encounter loss? How do you feel when a thing is lost? I have sometimes a problem losing things if I'm not concentrating on putting them in a specific spot. So I've got my keys, and my keys are always in one of three places. And if they're not in either of those three places, I feel hopeless. I'd just be like, oh no, where would they go? I feel some distress because of something that I want to be in a certain spot and it's not. And then when I find those keys or the thing that I lost, I'm like, yes, I found it. That's what Jesus said was common to people by telling the story of the lost coin that the woman recovered and the lost sheep that the shepherd recovered. But these aren't really stories about things or animals, they're stories about people. So not only do we have feelings when we lose something but find it again, the deeper meaning here is, how do you feel when a person is wrong in their relationship with God, wrong in their living, not acting right or in a trustworthy, good way? How do we feel? Do we feel a distress that they're lost? Do we feel a sadness over what could have been but now somehow is missing? And more importantly, how would you feel if that person who is living in wrong ways were to find forgiveness, to find a new beginning? Now we might think, of course we'd be happy if someone gets their life together or their heart changes. But it's not automatically the case, even for people of God. This is emphasized in the history of Jonah, who was called by God to warn the pagan city of Nineveh that there'd be consequences and judgment for their behavior. Now, Jonah didn't like Nineveh. He didn't like his mission. He didn't want to go, so he took a boat in the opposite direction. But the Lord course-corrected, caused him to fall into the sea after a storm, and transported Jonah back to his original destination by means of a huge whale or sea creature. So Jonah ended up going and interacting with the wicked people of Nineveh, and then something happened. We're told that when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction that he had threatened. That might seem like the best possible outcome, right? But not for Jonah. We're told Jonah considered this very wrong, and he became angry. He was upset that the people who deserved condemnation, deserved consequence, deserved punishment, did not receive it. He was not only angry at the outcome of his own missionary mission, he was angry at God. Christians can feel bitterness if we blame the people around us for the loss of good in our world, for making life complicated or more difficult. We can easily want to have people be punished for the wrongs that they have done, to get a taste of their own medicine, to say, see, how do you like it? That's what you deserve. What if God treated us that way? If God would treat us according to what our sins deserve in his holy judgment, he wouldn't give us any blessing. For God is holy, and he calls us to be holy, perfect. And only someone who's perfect has a right to be in a relationship with him, enjoy his blessings. What if God worked the way Jonah did and only had anger at wrong? Thankfully, the heart of God isn't just dominated by justice and judgment. There's another characteristic. And this is demonstrated most clearly in the person of Christ. Not just Jonah, but Jesus. Jesus worked different from Jonah, right? We're told in the book of Hebrews, for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. It was the joy of the outcome that got him through the difficult, painful part before it. The work of forgiving led to the joy of restoration. The work of searching led to the joy of the woman who said, rejoice with me, I've found my lost money. And what we're really talking about isn't money, but again, it's people. Heaven celebrates when even just one person is found to have a repentant heart. Therefore, Christians, God calls us to err on the side of grace. There may be times where we separate for safety, or if no progress can be made, or we might say, I know there's a conversation I want to have with you, but I'm not quite ready for it just yet. While those things and truths can be happen, because life is complex and so are people, yet in general, our heart will not be filled with a bitterness at those who do wrong, waiting for them to get blasted with punishment. But our heart will try to look deeper and say, is there any way that I can bring restoration instead of condemnation? And that helps us make sense of some of the complex, messy people problems we run into. I'm not a big fan of flying. I find it stressful and kind of uncomfortable. So you go into a crowded airline cabin, you have to find your seat with the little numbers, you're dragging your suitcase down this narrow aisle, bumping people, trying not to. The overhead bins might be full. You have to get in and sandwich in and buckle up and stay there. And flying is not, to me, my idea of a good time. But I'm willing to do it if I remember that I'm not in this cabin because the cabin is so amazing, but I'm in this cabin because of what I see on the screen in front of me. In the back of the airline seat, there may be a digital screen that has a map on it. And that map reminds me where I'm trying to go, to where I'm trying to get. The bigger picture helps me get through the frustration and dislike of the short-term flight. I'm on a bigger trip, a longer journey to a better destination. So as we get there, as we struggle not only with ourselves, but interacting with other people whose lives are not right, it's worth it, when possible, to be patient and make the effort. If you're a part of my congregation here, you may know some time ago we did a study called Lead, Listen, Love, where we talked about how to be a considerate and mission-minded congregation. The idea was, first you lead people to right behavior, then you listen to see if they're really committed to it, and if they are, then you decide you can love them. Lead, listen, love. Wait. I hope you don't remember that, because that's not the steps. The actual steps were first love, then listen, then lead. Before we lead someone, speak into their life and say, come to this direction, we have to know where they're coming from. Why are they behaving the way they are? What influenced them? What caused them? What do they consider important? What anger or sadness or regrets or griefs do they have? What are they afraid of? And then we can say, here might be what you need, or here's where some danger is. But before we can be in this space where we listen to the complex inner life of another person, we have to know that we're not going to use it to bash them. We're never going to have an honest conversation, to be able to speak lovingly, to be able to speak truthfully in love to another person, if they never are willing to open us up to us, and we are never willing to approach them. So the starting point is, first we love. We love. And love is your characteristic, not something you only give to another person. You can love somebody even if they're your enemy. You can love somebody even if they're their boss. No matter where you are, any person you interact with, it's always okay to act lovingly. And as we do this, as we act in love, those whose lives may look very different from ours or yours may be willing to speak and share their story with us. And then, when the time is right, we might be able to lead them to a better way, to a deeper understanding. Here's a few points to consider as you might do that down the road. This isn't exhaustive, but just some helpful pointers. Here's 4. First of all, ask, when I see somebody whose life is wrong, am I feeling compassion for them, wondering what happened, why they're hurting, what their behavior might lead them to? Or do I feel bitterness, an urge to punish them for the headache they're bringing into this world, and the resentment that I feel against who they are and how they act? Am I feeling compassion or bitterness? Bitterness can lead to a feeling to pay back, which is actually revenge. And it's God's right to take revenge on the evildoer, not ours. Sometimes God works through government, but not through the ordinary person. So if there's bitterness or an anger or resentment in us, first we solve that ingredient in our heart to make sure that we are motivated by truth and love. And then, with compassion, we may choose to engage. Secondly is to ask, do I have a legitimate authority over you? If I'm a parent, I have God-given authority to speak to a child and directly train or correct or discipline or rebuke and say that behavior needs to change. There may be the authority of that in government or in the church, where spiritual care or physical care is provided. But if you are not in a position of authority in home, church, or government, the right that you have to take control of somebody else's behavior is deeply, deeply limited. Thirdly, you might ask, do we have a faith relationship? Are you in my church? The Apostle Paul made this application. He asked the Corinthians, what business is it of ours to judge those outside of the church? And he expected his readers to know the answer. None. It's not our business. It's the right and responsibility that we give each other in the Christian community to speak to one another about spiritual things. But if you don't have a family relationship with somebody, if you don't have an authority relationship with somebody, if you don't have the common bond of Christian to Christian relationship with somebody, that generally means their life is between them and God. And not until we establish relationship with them would it be wise to speak into their life. And then finally, speak the truth in love. Do I actually know the facts of the wrong? If I see wrong over there, from over here, do I know why it happened and how it happened? What contributing factors were there? Was it malice or was it weakness? Was it intentional evil or a cry for help? Sometimes pain, which is a deep hurt and leads to anger, can cause someone to strike out. And sometimes when pain is in us, we can try to mute it or escape it in a maladaptive, not constructive way. And therefore, meeting anger with anger isn't always the answer. Sometimes when there's wrong in a person's life, we got to go underneath it and try to understand the pain that is underneath the anger, the pain that's underneath this behavior that's not good and it's not virtuous, but it's being used to hide the pain. So if there's hurt or if there's malicious evil, it makes a big difference. And until you have the facts, you can't speak with discernment into that person's life. It's always a challenge to ask, where do the boundaries of my behavior stop and where do the behaviors of another person start? We don't always have the right to reach into another person's life, but we always have the calling to act in love, and acting in love to say things that are true and to give the reason for the hope that we have. So I hope that as you become aware in your life, let's say you're a conscientious Christian and you not only want to honor God with your life, but you want to bring that same goodness to other people. It can be tricky to know how, and sometimes it's like me rolling my neck. I get dizzy really quickly. But I pray that the Lord would give you a compassionate heart, an understanding of the true circumstances, and above all, a humility to leave what is God's up to God and just understand the limited role and control you might have in your life. As the prophet Micah said, this might be worth memorizing, putting in your heart, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.